Welcome everyone to the fourth episode of the Instructional Influencer Series. My name is Kendra Doyle. I'm the Executive Director for Curriculum and Instruction, and we are so happy to have you here. The idea for the Instructional Influencer Series was born out of a desire for us to connect with other educators during a time in which we're all facing unprecedented challenges. The episodes are structured as a conversation, allowing us to ask questions that we all may have and share some approaches taken to solve common educational issues. The conversation will last approximately 45 minutes, but we encourage you to add your thoughts, comments, and questions into the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat the entire time and we will respond. And for those questions that you have for our presenters, we will circle back at the end and give them an opportunity also to respond to your contributions. So today's episode is on aggressive monitoring and gap analysis in action. We've all heard of it, so I'm excited to get an opportunity to have it broken down for us. What is aggressive monitoring? How this year are we using a gap analysis protocol to really make sure that we understand what our kids know and what they don't know and how we can intervene and support our kids. So today's host is Dr. Julio Garcia. He has 24 years of experience, and he has been a science and a math teacher, an assistant principal, a principal, and now he is one of our assistant superintendents of school leadership here in SAISD. We also have, we have two guests. Our first guest is Mr. Gregory Rivers. Gregory Rivers is a principal now at Ball Academy, or actually it's not an academy anymore, Ball Elementary School, excuse me. Mr. Rivers has 21 years of experience. He's been a teacher, an instructional coach, an assistant principal, and a principal, elementary, middle, and high school levels. We also have with us a teacher today. We have Miss Carmen Hurtado. She has 10 years of experience, all in elementary grades, and she is currently a third grade bilingual teacher at Ball Elementary School. We are so very excited to learn from the three of you guys, and take it away, Dr. Garcia.
Thank you, Ms. Doyle. Thank you for the invitation and giving us the opportunity to have a conversation about the type of work that is being done in several schools, specifically this time at Ball Elementary. And so with me, I have Mr. Rivers and Ms. Hurtado. So thank you for being part of this conversation, both of you. And one of the things that it's always on our mind, and every time that we meet with principals and assistant principals and faculty, is the idea that the school is the reflection of the community. And every time that we want to improve our community, our thought is that it starts at school. And so with that set in mind, we'll start a conversation on some of the things that we're doing at Ball Elementary, specifically on the topic of aggressive monitoring and how does gap analysis inform aggressive monitoring. And so we'll start with real quick, let's start in painting the picture of what that is and how does that idea comes through. So we start with the graduate release of responsibility and where does this strategy fall into place. So with that, Mr. Rivers, where exactly does aggressive monitoring fall in place when we talk about the graduate release of responsibility?
Well, when you aggressive monitor, you want to monitor students' independent work. You've gone through the process of maybe modeling with them, guiding them through several examples. And so now, as you release to the students, you want to see if they are holding on to what your processes and what your modeling is. And so really aggressive monitoring starts at that independent level. And it sort of changes what we do as educators, because, when I was in class, when you gave students independent work, you usually kind of chilled out, you checked your email, and you did also those kind of things. Because it's their work, it's their independent work. Well, we find that if we don't really watch what they're doing independently, we can build gaps in their learning. And so what we started to do about 3 or 4 years ago is introduce the concept of aggressive monitoring. And I think a little later we'll talk about the process that it is, but it's really at that independent phase that you want to make sure that students are following your modeling, following the processes that you put in place. And so our teachers will have what they call a teacher exemplar, an answer key, but it's not an answer key. It is the processes that the teacher wants the students to follow so they can be successful in their learning. So that's kind of where it fits. It fits in that independent part of your lesson, of your graduate release.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And so let's go over some vocabulary just in case. We'll touch base on some of this. And Ms. Hurtado, thank you for being here. But some of the vocabulary that you're going to hear is LAPS, monitoring pathway, pen in hand, coding, checking for understanding. We'll talk about exemplar. What is a tracking list or monitoring list? And what is a daily formative assessment? And so, Ms. Hurtado, tell us about what is a lab and what does that look like in your classroom?
A lab is when you name something that you expect the children to do during the independent work. So, for example, if I give them a question and I expect them to do something procedural, and just tell them, okay, I'm gonna be going around to look for you drawing a picture. So I check my students and make sure that they draw the picture. And if they're not, then I give them like a symbol telling them, okay, you need to do this. And I come back, I'm gonna come back and check what you're doing. So we have labs for procedure, looking for, and contextual.
Thank you. And so, Mr. Rivers, let's expand a little bit more on the labs. What exactly do you look for at the administrative level when you're looking and disseminating the information on those labs? What does that mean to you at your level? What are your look for on labs?
Well, when I go in as an administrator, I'm looking at the learning target. What was the learning target for the day? Or now now it might be on a Lumino or it might be on a Canvas, right? So, so once I know the learning target, then I'm looking to see what key questions are they asking in their lab. What are they checking for? So the lab has to connect with what the students are learning. There's sometimes procedural labs, put your name on your paper, all those things. But most teachers' labs tell them how the students are doing in the process that they're doing. Let's take math, for instance. If there's 4 processes that a student needs to do to get the answer correct, well, one of the labs is going to check that first one, that second one, that third one. So when I look at the teacher's tracking sheet, I'm looking for what type of check for understanding questions are they asking students and what are they checking for? That's really important. We really emphasized that this year. Our labs last year were kind of random. We have some, but we really kind of really focused on that check for understanding being really critical for the labs. Now, normally in a classroom, 3 labs, sometimes in math, it might be 4 or 5, depending on what the TEK is. But labs simply just help teachers ensure that students are getting the standard that they want. Another thing, and we'll probably talk a little bit about this later, is who are they going to check first? So the way you do aggressive monitoring is you list your student, your fastest student first. You can name them anything, your easy to teach student, your smartest student, whatever. They're first that you check. And the reason why you do that is, you want to check them and you want to move them along. And then the last student you check is your students who might be your struggling students who have a lot of gaps. And there's a reason that you do that, because it allows you to get to all of the students and you have a little bit more time to make some adjustments on your students who might be struggling with some gaps that they have in their learning.
Okay, that's an interesting concept, because in a traditional classroom, teachers tend to take care of the students that we know struggle first. And what happens is you end up spending as a teacher, almost all your time with the students that struggle. But what I'm hearing is differently. Like you will go and touch base with those students first,
Right.
that you feel that are faster to finish out the assignment or the lab, and then you gravitate to the students that will have a little bit more of attention. So thus increasing the one-on-one with every student and kind of validating every single student as you go around and doing your labs. Now, Ms. Hurtado, let's talk about a little bit more about the labs. As you go and you start your first lab, what happens? What are the processes that you're using as you go student by student and you realize that something is not clicking on those labs? So what happens at that moment?
Okay, well, my lab start with a pen, the pen in my hand and my binder. So checking each student, I go visit the fastest students, the ones that I know they're gonna finish first. So after I check that they're finished, I just say, good job, move on to the next one. So I'm not spending a lot of time with those students. So moving on to the next student, same thing, check that they're doing it. If not, give them some suggestions. Okay, you forgot to do this, you forgot to do that. I'll come back and check, you fix it, and then move on. So that gives me more time to go and visit every single student and on one lab. But if I go and I check my faster student and he's struggling, I move on to the next one and he's struggling, that means that I release them too fast from my lesson. So I have to come back and reteach whole group. So that's one of the informations that we use during the aggressive monitoring to make sure that the students are understanding the concept. If not, we need to stop and come back and reteach. And there is a question on the chat that do teachers build the prompts together? At this point, here at Bowl, we are not doing it together. Everybody is doing it based on what they need. But if anybody else needs support, yes, we do we'll go and support the teachers and give them suggestions what they can do. How can they identify what they need to be looking for? So yes, we do together and we do individually, depending on the needs.
Yeah, and also, you know, and it might get later when we start talking about gap analysis, but, you know, as we look at, you know, because now what's happening and what should happen in the school is each class is starting to have its own sort of personality when it comes to learning, right? So what Ms. Hurtado might be doing in her class in math is different from the other third grade teachers based on the skills that she needs to address with her students. And so that's what aggressive monitoring does. You know, you kind of sift out where your students are at, and it may be individualized. And really, teachers know their students well, so the labs are not something that, hey, here are your labs for perimeter, everybody. I don't do that. It's done by the teachers because they know their students better than anybody. And I wouldn't even pretend to give them the labs that are gonna help them, because that's something that's very classroom based, specifically to how your kids are faring on their assessments.
Right. So as I go from classroom to classroom, I've noticed that the teacher actually announces the lab before, so the students understand what the teacher is looking for. Does the first lab, checks every single student, comes back to the front of the classroom, announces the second lab, goes back and checks for understanding, announces the third lab and that. But I also, Mr. Rivers, I've noticed that, and Ms. Hurtado kind of talked about it right now briefly, they have a clipboard on their hand. Can you be more specific? What is that and what artifacts are in that clipboard?
Okay, so if I was to train a school on aggressive monitoring, it'd probably take about 30 minutes, right, Ms. Hurtado? It doesn't take long. So what the clipboard is, it has a list of students. Now, some of our teachers will put them in order from my fastest to my slowest student, but most don't. They know their path. So on the clipboard is an aggressive monitoring sheet. It has the students' names. It has, possibly the TEAC, and then at the bottom of it, it has the lab questions. What are they checking for? I'm coming around to see if you are highlighting your perimeter, right? Whatever that is. And so those are listed at the bottom. And then they might have on that is an exemplar. An exemplar is the teacher worked out all of the problems, underlined the evidence in reading, did all of those things first, because she wants to compare the student's work to her teacher exemplar. So then as a teacher uses their exemplar, they really can catch where the student is making their error on a process. So that clipboard has students' names, the labs that they're gonna be using that day, and then they'll check to see the results. If a student is struggling, they may not get the exit ticket that day because they struggle with the labs, then we will pull small groups right there, not tomorrow, not in 2 weeks, but we pull it right. The teacher will pull the small groups right there and start working on the skill that's needed for them to be successful in that standard.
Thank you. You mentioned that it takes about 30 minutes to implement aggressive monitoring, and I know it takes a little bit longer than that.
30 minutes to kind of train everyone on the process, but yeah, it takes a long time to really adapt it and use it.
So let's explore that. What systems have you put in place to roll out aggressive monitoring at your campus?
Well, like I said, we did it 3 years ago, and the first part of it was just getting teachers used to, you know, as a teacher, you want to sit with a student and help them until they get it. And that is a mindset change, and some teachers can gravitate to it faster, and some teachers it takes time because we were trained a different way. And so what I've done is I have sort of a checklist that mainly my instructional coach will do. We'll go to a teacher during their aggressive monitoring time, and we'll watch and we'll provide feedback. Hey, I saw you with your pen in hand, you had your clipboard, I heard your aggressive monitoring, you're checking for understanding questions, I heard your labs. And so we'll kind of list the things that they've done, and then we'll say, hey, this was missing. And so that's been helpful. And then as a leader, I check their aggressive monitoring sheets at the end of the day. We all have plastic bins on the doors, and so they know to just put how did their kids do. They just put it in the bin, and I'm able to look at it on a daily basis. And so I'm not the only one that does that. My instructional coach has teachers she looks at, she signs off of, my AP as well. So we divide the work up. And so it kind of tells me how we're doing on certain standards. It kind of helps me with the PD that I need to deliver to teachers, the conversations we need to have in our PLCs. So we really use that to kind of get a gauge of what we need to do. And what we've learned in the pandemic is, practicing and having students practice and practice and practice is really the way we're going to pull students out of, this pandemic. And so that's what we've learned this year. And that's what we're trying to implement. And that's coming from our aggressive monitoring, coming as, man, they keep missing this. Well, we need practice. And then we improve that. And so it's building a different system for us because of the pandemic.
So what have been some of the challenges to implement aggressive monitoring at the campus level?
I think the biggest challenge is the process of your listing your kids from highest, my quickest finisher to my lowest, and then consistently using that process. And then also, what are you asking when you do your lab, right? And so once again, when you go into aggressive monitoring, you're asking someone, like, for instance, if I taught 12, 14 years and you ask me to do that, I'm gonna have some slip ups because I think what I'm gonna do and what I saw when I visit classrooms is I'm gonna stop at so-and-so and I'm gonna help them and help them and help them and help them and help them until they get it. Well, this is not the kind of process this is more systematic. My goal in my lab is to get to every student to check to see what they're doing. That's a huge difference. It sounds simple, but you have to have a different mindset when you go to your independent work. And then just that, your independent work now becomes an area where you really want to know what's going on because you just released the instruction to students and now you really go to work. You really go to work because now this impacts your grouping, this impacts everything that you're going to do for the next day and how, if tutoring is needed, if students need to move forward because they're really moving faster. So yeah, it's a shift because it also shifts your planning as well.
Ms. Hurtado, what are the challenges at your level, at the teacher level?
I was going to add that I noticed that over the years, one of the challenges that the teachers face was which form fits better to your classroom. So we had several years ago, we had a debate, okay, kinder is going to use this form, third grade, fifth grade. So we had to get together and become a group and choose one that will help everybody. But even like that, some teachers still add different things to their forms for aggressive monitoring. So Mr. Rivers gave us the freedom to add whatever is necessary for us to understand the data and understand the students. So it's just whoever wants to use any form, as long as you have all the information. And the challenge also I heard from other teachers is naming the labs. It wasn't very clear at the beginning what are we supposed to be looking for? What are we supposed to be asking the students? So all of those things over the years is becoming easier and easier for us to understand.
Tell me about the students. What is the reaction of the students when you start doing aggressive monitoring with them?
What I noticed with the students is when they know that I call the lab, all the pencils are moving. Nobody's looking anywhere else. They're focused and they know that I'm gonna come and check. And when they're done, they know what they need to just get something to read while I finish with the other ones. Or by allowing aggressive monitoring, if I see that my lowest students are not performing, I'm not gonna give them an independent work. I'm gonna have the other ones, after I know that they're doing well, then I move my other students to the small group. And I know there is no problems because I know they're being monitored. I'm at the center of the classroom where I can see everybody. So aggressive monitoring has been helping me a lot, to me and the students. The students know what I expect from them.
Correct. So you release the students to do independent practice after your labs. Only those that you feel 100% confident that they're going to be successful to continue to do more practice. And those that have not, then you bring them in for a small group. Tell me a little bit more about that small group. What's that look like, sounds like?
A small group, then I see what they're struggling with. And if it's just a skill, then I reteach the skill just with them. Or if it's something like comprehension, then we go over the piece by piece with the word problems. But it's individualized to each of the students that I have. I have 3 special students that I know they need a lot more support than the others.
What happened to the students that are still not successful after small instruction and a small group instruction? What's the next step for them?
The next step will be staying for tutoring 1 or twice a week, or they would tutor after school.
Perfect. So go ahead, Mr. Rivers.
Yeah, and so at the end of the independent work, when I can actually know when I look at the monitoring sheet who was in small group. It'll say on the small group, I didn't give them the exit ticket because they didn't get it, small group. And so, now that begins to sort of build your intervention plans. That starts to become an MTSS issue. You have it there. And these are documents that you can use for MTSS. That's the great thing about it. It does a lot of things for us. We just, you just have to kind of really think about it and kind of sit back and say, yeah, you know what? I'm seeing the progress of my students. And then the goal is to move those students to a point to where they're not having that small group support. And in some of our standards, that is the case. We can have some students, they small grouped in this TEK, but not this TEK. And then one of the things that I'll do with teachers is I'll go by and I say, hey, I keep noticing that so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so are struggling. let's focus on them at the very beginning of the lesson. Let's go see if where we can catch to where they're making their gaps. That makes a significant change sometimes with students. If the student doesn't have a learning disability that is hindering that, if it's something where we can catch early in the lesson, you know, we can catch it early, and then we can help them with their assessments. You know, exit tickets are kind of like, right now, we're not really doing exit tickets, we're doing daily formal assessments. Because we, like I said, the pandemic has taught us, oh, we need to review and give students what we call at-bats, practice, practice, practice until they can't get it wrong. And so that's kind of where we're at right now in our campus right now.
Thank you. So let's move a little bit more. You kind of mentioned about support systems for aggressive monitoring. I know it's not something that happens, you know, in one sitting. I know it's just not one day PD.
No.
It's a constant refinement of the task and the performance on aggressive monitoring. So let's move into what happens in your PLCs, and how is gap analysis used to inform decisions when it comes down to aggressive monitoring. So let's talk a little bit more your PLCs and that gap analysis, and how is that used to inform decisions?
Yeah, so I think the last year, I think the instructional coaches with you, Dr. Garcia, they started talking about and developing the gap analysis. And we implemented, you know, we were kind of working with it, I guess piloting it last year, but now it's become like an integral part of our PLC. And basically what the gap analysis is before a teacher introduces a lesson to the students, it's shared with their colleagues in the PLC. There's a structure to it where we list possible misconceptions. We list what do the students need to know and be able to do in order to be successful on this standard. Misconceptions are discussed. I don't know if y'all remember the teacher resource system. It was really strong in misconceptions. And so the teachers have just adapted that, and that was part of the gap analysis that was there. And then they will list their checking for understanding questions in the gap analysis. Then that's about a 20-minute process that the teachers will work on, 20, 25 minutes. And then they will introduce that lesson to the PLC. And then we use something called a critical friends protocol, where it's a protocol where they'll ask the teacher questions, they'll give them I like and I wonder, and then the teacher is able to respond and improve on their lesson if that's what's needed. And so we select about 2 teachers per PLC. And then this lesson is then monitored, and our instructional coaches keeps improving this process. Now she adds, hey, what was your daily assessment data? What did it say after you delivered this lesson? So that's kind of how we approach our PLC. Of course, teachers have to be ahead of us in their planning so that we can get this, you know, so we can move forward on this. And that hasn't been a problem at all.
Thank you. And I've seen your PLCs and how you go through the gap analysis, but last time where I was there, I saw Ms. Hurtado going into the protocol that you just mentioned, which was critical friends. So Ms. Hurtado, tell us a little bit more in detail about what critical friends protocol is, and what is the expectation for you, and what is the learning that you get from doing a protocol like that?
Yeah, during the process of that, what is expected for me is to demonstrate the lesson the way I will deliver to the students, going through the GRR model. And after that, I present my lesson, then my colleagues will give me some suggestions, so give me some good feedback about what they like, what they didn't like. And I really like that process because a lot of times we just plan the lessons and we don't think about the activities very well. And a lot of times when we're here, they say, well, what about this? What about that? What it doesn't work? What are you gonna do? How are you gonna differentiate? That's another thing that a lot of times we overlook, and we just deliver the lesson as a whole. So those are the little things that I like during the critical friends, because it gives me the pinpoints that I might have forgotten in my lesson. So After that, we deliver the lesson, then we'll see if it worked or it didn't work. So what suggestions they have, other ideas. The exit ticket, they analyze the exit ticket too, or the independent work, if it's aligned to my lesson. So we need to make sure that when we have that, that I do, that we do, and that you do, everything needs to be aligned. You know, nothing is floating out there, just throwing in there. And then the independent work has to go back to the objective. So I like critical friends process. I really enjoy that. It's a little intimidating at the beginning, but you get used to it.
So one of the things about the critical friends protocol that is hilarious, and it is because we all kind of like each other. We've been together for about 4 years, and so the first part of critical friends is there's going to be a lot of I like, right? Because and then the wonders start coming in, but we have to get comfortable with each other. And I think we're at a process where the I wonders and the I likes are balanced now, because at the beginning, well, I like this because I like the teacher, she's my friend, so I'm not going to really, you know. So the reason why we do a critical friends protocol, because it takes that, that's why it's called critical friends, because I'm not really attacking you when I'm saying I'm wondering about this. I'm wondering, hey, I wonder if you brought in Hershey bars when you're talking about the chocolate factory, would that help the students? I wonder, you know, you're just asking questions. And the process is, as we're talking, if Ms. Hurtado is doing a critical friends, her back is turned to us. She can't see us, and we're having a conversation, and she can only hear what we're saying. And she writes down all the notes that she's hearing, the likes, I wonders. And then after a certain time is up, she'll then turn around and then we'll have a conversation with her. So it's a really neat protocol that we follow. We felt like a protocol was very important because we wanted it to be structured, and we want the conversation to be rich.
Right. So talking about, you know, aggressive monitoring, gap analysis, your PLC, and what happens in the classroom. I mean, you've been at Ball Academy for several years. Tell me how this new system is different from any traditional classroom that you used to have before.
Well, I just think it's more prescriptive. And, you know, in listening to what we're talking about with students and students out for 21 to 24 months, we have to be very prescriptive about what students need, where their gaps are at. And it's a system that doesn't overwhelm the teacher, you know, because we've had conversations about, hey, let's change this. You know, we'll talk about some things that need to be adjusted to make sure it's beneficial to all. But I think it's a prescriptive way of really knowing your students and being able to respond to their needs, being able to respond to your students who are at a very high level, as students in the middle, and students that need more support, because we don't want anyone to fall in the cracks. You know, we know as a district, some of our higher students will sometimes take a dip the next grade level. You know, the data's there. You know, we've been working with Ben Reyes on that. And so it really helps us really get into a system of a blended model where we're prescribing what students need once we get the data. And so the way it's changed our campus is, I think the checking for understanding was a big push when we start to add that to our labs. Now, we don't just give exit tickets out at the end of the class period, and we know kids are going to fail. We now have put in a system of small group instruction every day to support them. That has been a huge change. And, you know, we're seeing results that, you know, we looked at some of our math data in primary to third grade was really high, with students' growth goal being really high. And so we're really excited about that, you know. And one of the things I'll say is it's also helped us to understand that there's this serious curve of kidding for kids, that even though you could see a great lesson in a gap analysis, but if you don't put it in a practice mode where students are getting practice and practice and practice, they'll forget it. and it'll seem like you didn't teach it, you did, they just forgot it because it was 2 months ago and they didn't have practice. And so they forgot the skills. And so that's like, you know what? We learned that. We're learning that. We're putting that in place. We hope that it's gonna, we get enough time to get that practice in to where it's gonna make a difference in their summative test. We'll see. We're excited about it. We put it in place. We discovered it, but the checking for understanding has been probably the biggest thing that we've done, and employing small groups. And when you go to our campus, you're going to see some kids being pulled. Jesse, John, Hector, over here. You know, you'll hear that. And because there was something that happened in aggressive monitoring that the teacher felt like she needs to go over it with them again. So they didn't get their exit ticket. They didn't get their daily assessment because she's going to work with them, and then she might give it to them that day, or she might give it to them the next day.
Got it. So, Ms. Hurtado, when you're pulling students, how do you build the culture in your classroom where students understand that when you're separating them for a small group, it's okay to do that? Like, what is your process? What did you talk about with the students? Because sometimes as a student, you don't want to be singled out. You don't want to be pulled in a small group because they know that you need that extra. So what is it that you did in your classroom that really helps you or the student understand that it's okay to be pulled for a small group instruction?
I have to be very strategic in that because especially I don't want to single nobody out. So the way I do it is I do certain groups for certain things. So depending on the TEAC, I pull high, medium, and low, I pull them in. So I have groups where they're only the low ones, only the mediums, and only the highs. But then I mix them all up. So there is no specific, okay, I belong to that group. So my groups are very strategically built throughout the day. So, and one of the, from the perspective of what Mr. Rose was talking about, the difference from before we implemented aggressive monitoring to now, from my perspective is that helped me a lot to know my kids. When I started, the principal would come and ask me, so how is he doing? And I'm like, so now with the aggressive monitoring every day, he can come anytime and I can easily tell him, okay, well, she's struggling with this, she's struggling with that. So that's a big help. So we're not thinking, okay, I don't know, what do I need to help them? It's very easy to know what they need. So
it has changed teacher accountability.
Yes, yes.
What I like about this,
it makes it a lot easy. Makes it a lot easy not to, for us to be on the spot when they come and ask. So now they can come and ask anytime and we know what we're doing. So
well, I think what I like about it, is like I can go to any class and say, well, because we're looking at the data daily and say, oh, I noticed that she did this. Yeah, but we're still working on this. And so I'm not surprised, right? It's not like I'm in my office and I don't know I actually can look at the data on a daily basis and then have a conversation, and the teacher will tell you, we're still working on money, coins, and they'll tell me specific things that the student is still working on, and then they'll tell me, well, they got it and that's why they're in Math Imagine or whatever. So it's like, it feels like there's not a separation between the leadership team and the teachers. There's just this like, hey, what can I buy you or get for you to help move this along? What do you need? Do you need more time to, so now the conversation that we have in our PD is more about what's needed so that we can kind of close the gaps as fast as we can. That's really where we're at as a school. Like, okay, what can we do to help? Because I feel like the teachers really know their students because of the processes of gap analysis and aggressive monitoring on a daily basis. They know what they have and they know how to build their groups, and they're constantly redesigning things, changing things based off of what students' outcomes are happening on a daily basis. And through map data and through our assessments, we constantly are, moving things around.
So it sounds like it's a different type of accountability at the campus level. So the last questions will be, how do students keep you accountable?
How do the students keep me accountable? They will tell me, Mr. Hurtado, you forgot to do this, because they already know the routine. So if there is something different, they will say, you forgot to do this, you forgot to do that. Like we have like a review, so they know at the beginning, of math, we do a review, then we do the timetables. So there is things that they already know that they're in place. So they expect it. So you move any little thing and they'll tell you. So yeah, they know their routines every day, what they have, what is expected from them to do. I can leave my classroom and they can take care of themselves.
One of the things I wanted to share, especially middle school, high school too, is one of the byproducts of aggressive monitoring is it helps with discipline. You know, if you consider when you in middle school, because I had middle school students, and you're not releasing, you know, you're working with them independently, but you're there, you're in the middle, like you're right in the middle of them. And you're watching their process. And what I noticed, I had a young teacher, and I don't have her anymore. She went back to Chicago. That was devastating for me. But I remember we taught her one thing. I said, you know what, just focus on aggressive monitoring. And she was really struggling before that. And she started doing that, and it was 6th grade. And instead of it putting a check on her paper when she would mark the text, she'd give them a sticker. And she noticed that her discipline issues went away. They just like disappeared because she was always having a conversation with them, one student at a time. Okay, I'm coming back to see. And the students really thought of her differently. They thought that she really cared for them. And I noticed that when I walked in, you know, she wasn't all flustered. She was like, I'm in control of this. I have control of this. I'm having a great time. And her 2nd year, she blossomed. And I felt like I didn't teach her a lot of things. I just said, hey, let's work on this. Let's get this really down. And we'll help you, and we'll go through and see you do it. She was outstanding. And so, and that was middle school. And so one of the byproducts is now in elementary, you know, kids usually have a love for their teacher and all that. And you know, it's different kind of atmosphere than middle school. But it really helps. It really helps if it's implemented correctly and it's implemented daily, and you're checking. It can help any student at any level, and that's even in AP. I mean, when you see the videos of aggressive monitoring, you'll see AP classes using it. You know, it's just not for elementary. So it's a skill. It's a process that can be used at any level because you're checking students' progress on their independent assignments.
Thank you. Ms. Hurtado, thank you for giving us the opportunity to have this conversation with you and be have a lens on your classroom of what happens in your classroom through this conversation. Mr. Rivers, thank you for kind of guiding us what the process has been in your campus of aggressive monitoring, gap analysis, and what happens in your classroom. It is interesting to see it live. We can talk and talk and talk about it. And it's not when you really experience it live and you see the students and the engagement in the classroom that really clicks. Everything makes sense. Things that we always said, like, well, how come we don't do this? We don't do that. I know the conversation that we're leading towards the next step on aggressive monitoring, because we're doing this type of work with the schools that we support. And through elementary, middle school, and now high school, we're starting to see a tremendous growth in the students and the engagement there. So one of the things that we're looking forward is, how do we really prepare students so they can have enough at-bat practice? And so the idea is that through aggressive monitoring, having the students really understanding the concept, so you feel comfortable as a teacher that not only the student can have enough practice in the classroom, but also sending extra practice at home. And so the next step for aggressive monitoring our clusters is really refining what happens outside the classroom at the student's home, but knowing that you feel comfortable that the student will have the knowledge to do any work that you send home without any assistance from anyone. And so that's the type of work that we're looking after. And so thank you very much for having this conversation with us, Ms. Doyle.
Thank you guys so much. I was taking notes and I had to keep grabbing other pieces of paper to keep up with you guys. This is an excellent conversation to come off of our previous board presentation that was done for academics, where we talked about tiered instruction, and a lot of the questions that we received were around how do we know where students are in their learning and how do we respond? And so this is an excellent answer to that question as far as the aggressive monitoring and how we make sure that we touch base with 100% of our students multiple times every day. We give them individualized feedback, and we don't wait till the end of the lesson to see if they got it. We check throughout and make sure that we are attending to their needs in real time. And so I loved everything you guys talked about today. It was excellent. And even, the PLC part, where we're giving professionals the opportunity to thoughtfully design lessons and practice before implementation with feedback. So you guys had so many excellent things to share today, and we just loved hearing all of it.